tonight, we return to a Rome that stood at the edge of absolute power and quietly stepped back. This is a story of a world where control never hardened into empire, where history chose calm over command. You don't need to stay awake to follow it. Just let the story unfold. The city wakes without announcement, as it always has, not with trumpets or commands, but with the quiet recognition of light spreading across stone and tile, touching the edges of roofs before it reaches the streets. And in that unhurried moment, Rome is simply present, neither rising nor falling, only continuing, as it has learned to do through habit rather than force. People move because they always have, not because they are summoned, and the rhythm of their movement is shaped by expectation and memory more than by decree. The Senate House opens its doors as it did yesterday, and as it will tomorrow, the hinges worn smooth by generations of hands that did not think of themselves as shaping history, only as maintaining something that already existed and seemed likely to continue. Julius Caesar walks through these spaces without the sharp outline that later stories might give him. He is recognized, of course, greeted with nods that acknowledge familiarity rather than awe, and his presence settles into the day like a known weather pattern that rarely surprises. His influence is real but distributed, expressed through conversations that drift across porticos and through written opinions passed between magistrates who read them slowly, considering each word without urgency. He does not stand above the city, he moves within it, one current among many, aware that Rome breathes best when no single voice fills all the air. In this Rome, authority learned early how to spread itself thin, like water across fields, nourishing without overwhelming. Laws are discussed at length, sometimes over months, sometimes over years, until they feel less like decisions and more like acknowledgements of what has already begun to happen. The people who debate them understand that time is not an enemy, and delay is not decay. When something is not ready, it simply waits, resting among other unfinished thoughts, and no one feels compelled to force it into shape. The forum remains a place of sound, but the sounds are layered rather than loud, voices overlapping gently, merchants calling out prices that change little from week to week, advocates rehearsing arguments that will be delivered calmly, without theatrical display. Even disagreements carry a softness, framed by shared assumptions about continuity. No one expects a single speech to overturn the world, and so speeches unfold without strain, their meanings settling gradually into the collective awareness like dust that eventually becomes part of the ground. Seasons pass almost unnoticed except in the subtle adjustments they bring. Cloaks grow heavier, then lighter again. Grain shipments arrive with the dependable patience of tides, managed by committees that rotate membership slowly, ensuring that no one becomes indispensable. Caesar advises on logistics here, suggests compromises there, his experience valued precisely because it is not absolute. He is listened to, not obeyed, and in this distinction Rome finds a long, steady balance. Beyond the city walls, roads extend like thoughts that do not insist on conclusion. They are maintained regularly, stones replaced as they wear down, not because an empire demands reach, but because connection feels natural. Travelers move along them at unremarkable speeds, carrying news that arrives already softened by distance. By the time a report reaches Rome, it has lost any sharp edge it once had, becoming information rather than alarm. provincial towns govern themselves with guidance rather than command. Charters are revised slowly, often incorporating local customs rather than erasing them. Roman law is not a rigid structure imposed from above, but a flexible framework that bends slightly to accommodate different rhythms of life. Administrators sent from the city are chosen for temperament as much as for skill, selected because they know how to listen, how to wait, how to let decisions emerge instead of forcing them. Caesar spends long hours reading reports that describe ordinary things: harvest yields, repairs to aqueducts, disputes between neighbors resolved through mediation. These texts do not demand immediate action, and so he reads them with a steady mind, making notes that will be shared with others, suggestions rather than orders. His handwriting is neat, unhurried, and his comments often begin with acknowledgments of work already done, reinforcing the sense that governance is an ongoing conversation rather than a chain of commands. Architecture changes gradually, almost imperceptibly. New buildings rise where old ones have quietly reached the end of their usefulness. Styles blend rather than replace, columns echoing older proportions while incorporating minor refinements that feel more like evolution than innovation. Public spaces remain open, designed for gathering without spectacle, and the city's appearance reflects a preference for durability over display. Philosophers walk the same streets as artisans, their discussions drifting into workshops and baths, where ideas mingle with steam and the scent of oil. Stoic patience and practical reasoning coexist comfortably, reinforcing a cultural assumption that inner stability mirrors civic stability. People speak often of balance, not as an abstract ideal, but as a lived experience, something felt in the way days unfold without abrupt interruption. Children grow up hearing stories that do not center on conquest or sudden change, but on endurance, on families who remain through generations, adapting quietly to shifts in trade or climate. Education emphasizes memory and judgment, teaching young minds to value continuity, to see themselves as caretakers rather than conquerors. Caesar supports these approaches, funding schools that encourage measured thought, not because he seeks legacy, but because such thinking aligns with the Rome he recognizes. The Senate continues its work with a rhythm shaped by tradition. Demonstrations of power are rare and generally regarded as unnecessary. Votes are taken after long periods of discussion, and outcomes often reflect compromise so balanced that no faction feels entirely victorious or defeated. This lack of drama is not seen as weakness. It is understood as a sign that the system is functioning as intended. Trade networks expand slowly, guided by mutual benefit rather than extraction. Agreements are revised patiently, allowing all parties time to adjust. Markets become places of predictable exchange, where prices fluctuate within narrow ranges, reinforcing a sense of economic steadiness. Coinage remains consistent, its imagery familiar, reassuring in its lack of novelty. As years pass, Caesar ages in public view, his presence gradually shifting from active participation to quiet counsel. He attends fewer assemblies, but when he does speak, his words carry the weight of long observation rather than authority. Younger magistrates listen with respect, not because they fear him, but because his perspective reflects a lived understanding of Rome's preference for diffusion over dominance. No moment arrives that demands a declaration of empire. There is no sense of something missing, no anticipation of a transformation that must occur. The Republic continues to adjust itself, refining procedures, redistributing responsibilities, responding to challenges with incremental change. Power remains a shared practice, embedded in routines rather than concentrated in a single office. Religious life follows a similar pattern, rituals observed with consistency, adapted gently as beliefs evolve. Temples are maintained, festivals held on familiar dates, providing markers of time that reinforce continuity. Faith supports the civic order by emphasizing harmony with the existing world rather than transcendence through upheaval. Even distant conflicts, when they arise, are managed through layers of negotiation that soften their impact. Reports of unrest are met with discussions, envoys sent with broad discretion to find solutions suited to local conditions. Violence, when unavoidable, is brief and contained, quickly absorbed into the ongoing flow of events without becoming a defining narrative. The River Tiber continues its steady course, sometimes higher, sometimes lower, never alarming those who live beside it. Its presence becomes a metaphor, often invoked but rarely analyzed, a reminder that persistence does not require force. Bridges are repaired as needed, their arches unchanged in spirit even as stones are replaced one by one. Generations overlap, with elders sharing space with those who will replace them, knowledge transferring through observation more than instruction. Caesar's death, when it eventually comes, is noted with respect but without shock. His contributions are remembered as part of a continuum, not as a turning point. Life in Rome adjusts seamlessly, offices filled, routines maintained, the absence felt gently and then integrated into memory. The Republic continues, not as an ideal frozen in time, but as a living system that expects to change slowly. No single year defines its character. Instead, its identity is shaped by the accumulation of ordinary days, by the absence of rupture, by the shared understanding that stability is not stagnation but a form of care. As attention drifts, the city remains, its processes unfolding whether observed or not. Councils meet, markets open, roads are traveled, seasons turn. The story does not conclude because nothing has ended. Rome breathes in its own time, unhurried, balanced, and the movement of history continues quietly, like a wide river flowing beyond sight, carrying with it the gentle assurance that change, when it comes, arrives slowly enough to feel safe, and that even then, it does not need to be noticed to be real. Morning duties resume without reference to the day before. Clerks arrive early, smoothing wax tablets and unrolling scrolls that carry notes from neighboring districts, most of them concerned with repairs, boundary clarifications, or the reassignment of minor offices whose holders have grown old enough to prefer less walking. These matters are not rushed. Ink dries while hands pause, and decisions are shaped as much by familiarity with precedent as by the present circumstances described. The rooms where this work happens are quiet enough that footsteps can be heard, yet busy enough that silence never feels empty. In residential quarters, households follow patterns shaped by long usage rather than instruction. Water is drawn, meals prepared, tools checked and returned to their places. Small courtyards collect light at different angles through the year, and people adjust where they sit without thinking about why. These adjustments become habits, passed on without explanation, just as ways of speaking and gestures of greeting drift across generations. No one notices these transfers clearly. They occur beneath attention, like breathing. The city's outskirts show a different rhythm, where gardens and workshops meet. Here, soil is turned carefully, plots divided and redivided as families grow or merge. Agreements about land use are discussed locally, with references to older arrangements that still carry weight. Magistrates rarely intervene unless invited, and even then they tend to listen more than speak, trusting that those closest to the land understand its needs better than any central authority could. Public baths remain places where distinctions soften. Senators, artisans, and traders share the same warm air, their conversations overlapping without urgency. Topics move easily from weather to construction projects to philosophical questions raised without expectation of resolution. Ideas circulate here not as arguments to be won, but as observations to be considered later, perhaps never fully answered. This openness reinforces a civic mood that values ongoing thought over decisive conclusion. Libraries expand gradually, shelves added where space allows, texts copied carefully with attention to accuracy rather than speed. Marginal notes accumulate, reflecting layers of interpretation rather than a single authoritative reading. Scholars accept this accumulation as a strength, understanding that meaning deepens through repetition and variance. Caesar's earlier writings appear among these texts, cited occasionally, never elevated beyond discussion. Artisans continue refining techniques that change so slowly they appear static to casual observers. Pottery glazes improve subtly, fabrics last a little longer, tools become marginally easier to handle. These improvements spread through imitation rather than proclamation. Guilds exist more as social anchors than regulatory bodies, providing continuity of practice without rigid control. Administrative practices adapt in similar fashion. Record-keeping becomes slightly more systematic over time, not through reform decrees but through shared recognition that clarity reduces friction. Forms standardize, then adjust again as circumstances suggest better arrangements. Nothing is fixed permanently, and this flexibility prevents the sense of strain that rigid systems often produce. Outside Rome, coastal towns maintain their own councils, aligning loosely with the city while preserving local rhythms. Shipping schedules follow seasonal patterns, and captains plan routes based on accumulated knowledge rather than centralized directives. Goods arrive predictably, their movement governed by trust built over long familiarity rather than enforced compliance. Religious observances continue marking time without asserting control over it. Offerings are made, festivals held, not as obligations, but as shared pauses in routine. The calendar provides structure without pressure, reminding people of cycles rather than deadlines. Even when new cults appear, they are absorbed gradually, their practices blending into existing customs without displacing them. Legal disputes are handled with patience, proceedings stretching over weeks if necessary to allow all voices to be heard. Judges emphasize restoration over punishment, aiming to re-establish balance rather than assert authority. Outcomes often involve compromises that feel ordinary enough to be accepted without resentment, reinforcing confidence in the process itself. The physical fabric of the city responds to use rather than design. Streets widen where traffic increases, narrow where movement slows. Repairs follow where patterns. and nothing is rebuilt simply to demonstrate power. This responsiveness gives Rome an appearance of organic growth, as if shaped by collective habit rather than imposed vision. Education remains practical, grounded in rhetoric, arithmetic, and moral reasoning understood as tools for participation rather than advancement. Teachers adjust lessons to the pace of their students, allowing comprehension to settle naturally. There is little emphasis on competition. Progress is measured by steadiness rather than distinction. As these routines continue, the idea of an emperor remains abstract, discussed occasionally in philosophical terms but lacking urgency. The shared memory of concentrated authority exists as a caution rather than a temptation, reminding citizens of the value found in dispersion and mutual dependence. This memory does not provoke fear, it simply informs preference. Night falls without ceremony, lamps are lit, conversations soften, and the city sounds thin into a background murmur that carries on without drawing attention. Even as individual awareness fades, processes continue. Guards walk familiar routes, scribes finish copying lines, water flows through channels maintained by hands long since forgotten. Nothing signals an endpoint. The patterns persist, adjusting quietly, sustaining a Rome that moves forward by remaining, its history unfolding in layers too gentle to demand notice, extending onward in the same calm manner, beyond any single moment of awareness. Work along the river proceeds at a measured pace, with barges nudged into place by poles rather than shouted orders. The men and women who handle cargo know the feel of current and stone, adjusting their movements almost unconsciously. Tallies are kept on small boards hung from nails, marks added with care and checked again later, not because errors are feared, but because accuracy has become a shared habit. Nearby, fishermen mend nets, fingers moving steadily, conversations drifting toward matters that do not require answers. In shaded corners of the city, minor courts convene under open roofs, allowing air to pass freely. Those who attend sit without rigid arrangement, listening as one voice gives way to another. The pace of speech remains unforced, and pauses are accepted as part of thought rather than interruptions. Decisions emerge gradually, shaped by precedent and the particulars of the moment, and when they are recorded, the language used reflects moderation, avoiding absolutes that might close future possibilities. Across neighborhoods, maintenance crews tend to fountains and drainage channels, clearing debris before it accumulates. Their work is rarely remarked upon, yet its effects are felt everywhere, contributing to a sense of ease that permeates daily movement. Children play nearby, learning boundaries through repetition rather than instruction, their games adapting to the available space without complaint. Political gatherings remain modest affairs. Attendance fluctuates, and no one seems troubled when a seat remains empty. Those present contribute as they are able, some speaking briefly, others listening throughout. Notes are taken, revised, set aside, and revisited later. There is no pressure to conclude matters quickly. Unresolved questions are seen as signs of careful consideration. In private homes, correspondence is composed with attention to tone as much as content. Letters often begin with observations about weather or shared acquaintances, easing into more substantive matters only after establishing familiarity. Responses may take days to arrive, and this delay is understood as part of the exchange, allowing thoughts to mature before being expressed. Markets adjust subtly to shifts in supply, merchants recalibrating offerings based on experience rather than directive. Goods appear and disappear from stalls without announcement, replaced by alternatives that meet current needs. Shoppers adapt easily, trusting that essentials will remain available. This mutual confidence reduces anxiety, reinforcing the sense that systems function even without constant oversight. Craft traditions pass through apprenticeship, knowledge conveyed through demonstration rather than instruction. Mistakes are corrected quietly, without emphasis, allowing learners to adjust without discouragement. Over time, these methods produce consistency without uniformity, each practitioner contributing minor variations that enrich the whole without altering its character. Public spaces accommodate gatherings large and small without distinction. Benches are repositioned, temporary awnings raised, then removed again when no longer needed. These adjustments leave little trace, returning spaces to familiar arrangements that feel both stable and adaptable. The city seems to respond to use rather than resist it. Written law continues to evolve through annotation rather than replacement. Margins fill with clarifications, exceptions, and cross-references, creating documents that resemble conversations across time. Legal scholars treat these layers with respect, recognizing that understanding emerges from accumulation rather than singular interpretation. The presence of authority is felt less through symbols than through reliability. When issues arise, there is confidence that someone will attend to them, though not necessarily immediately. This expectation reduces the impulse to demand attention, allowing processes to unfold without strain. As evening approaches, lamps are lit in workshops where tasks require steady hands. The glow spills into streets, softening outlines and reducing emphasis on detail. Movement slows naturally, conversations tapering into quieter exchanges. The city does not announce rest, it eases into it. Beyond the immediate awareness of those settling into night, correspondence continues to circulate. Goods move incrementally toward destinations, and records accumulate in archives where they will be consulted when needed. These ongoing actions do not seek recognition. They persist because they have been woven into the fabric of life, extending forward without urgency, maintaining a continuity that feels neither imposed nor fragile, simply present, carrying on in its own measured way. Stonecutters begin their tasks before the streets fully stir, choosing blocks already set aside weeks earlier, their surfaces marked with chalk lines that guide hands accustomed to patient pressure. Chips fall in small, predictable patterns, gathered and reused where possible, nothing wasted because nothing needs to be hurried. Nearby, supervisors observe without intervening, trusting the rhythm that experience has already established. In shaded rooms adjacent to the Senate, archivists adjust shelves to accommodate new bundles of documents, their movements careful to preserve order without freezing it. Records are grouped by relevance rather than strict chronology, allowing those who consult them to follow ideas as they developed rather than as they occurred. This method proves useful, though no decree ever formalizes it. Others simply adopt it when they see its value. At the edges of the city, inns receive travelers whose journeys have unfolded without notable difficulty. Hosts ask few questions, offering water and space before conversation. News is shared casually, stripped of urgency by distance and repetition, becoming background knowledge rather than cause for concern. What matters most is that paths remain open and predictable, a fact taken for granted until its absence would be felt. In workshops, innovations appear quietly. A hinge moves more smoothly, a latch holds more securely. These refinements spread by observation, one artisan noticing another's work and adapting it to local needs. No single improvement alters the character of the craft. Together they sustain it, keeping tools aligned with the hands that use them. Civic rituals continue with minimal alteration. Oaths are renewed, offices assumed, responsibilities acknowledged aloud so that others may hear and remember. These moments pass without spectacle, their significance resting in repetition rather than display. The words spoken are familiar enough to feel reassuring, yet flexible enough to accommodate the speaker's own emphasis. Along covered walkways, philosophers and merchants occasionally share benches, exchanging remarks that wander from abstract reasoning to practical concerns. Neither dominates the exchange. Ideas are offered as possibilities, not assertions, and often left unfinished, their value residing in the contemplation they prompt, rather than in any conclusion reached. Domestic spaces evolve slowly. Walls are repainted, rooms rearranged, gardens expanded or reduced as needs shift. These changes occur incrementally, guided by daily use rather than planning. Over time, houses reflect the lives lived within them, their layouts shaped by patterns of movement repeated until they become natural. Public works receive steady attention. Aqueducts are inspected, sections reinforced where wear suggests future weakness. The work is preventive, not reactive, carried out with the assumption that continuity depends on foresight more than response. When repairs are completed, tools are stored carefully, ready for the next cycle of maintenance. Cultural practices absorb new influences without displacing older ones. Songs gain additional verses, recipes incorporate unfamiliar ingredients, garments adopt subtle variations. These additions are accepted without debate, integrated because they fit existing habits rather than challenge them. As night deepens, the city's presence does not diminish, it simply alters its expression. Conversations move indoors, footsteps become less frequent, and the glow from windows marks occupied spaces. Beyond these visible signs, processes continue at a scale that does not require observation, sustaining arrangements already in motion. Nothing signals a pause or an endpoint. The flow persists, shaped by accumulated care, extending onward in the same unforced manner, available to attention, yet never dependent upon it. Dawn moisture settles briefly on stone before warming air lifts it away, leaving surfaces cool to the touch for those who pass early. Bakers open shutters, testing heat by feel rather than measure, adjusting ovens in small increments learned over years of repetition. Loaves are arranged with spacing that reflects habit more than calculation, and the scent that follows does not announce itself so much as become part of the surrounding atmosphere. In administrative courtyards, attendants arrange seating according to who is present rather than according to rank fixed in advance. This flexibility is understood and expected, preventing discomfort before it arises. Discussions that follow are shaped by the arrangement itself, encouraging exchange rather than address, and outcomes reflect the shared orientation of those involved, rather than the influence of any single position. Along quieter streets, repair work proceeds on facades, weathered unevenly by sun and rain. Plaster is mixed to match existing tones, ensuring continuity of appearance even as surfaces renew. The aim is preservation without emphasis, maintaining familiarity so that change registers as maintenance rather than alteration. In schools, lessons unfold at a pace determined by comprehension. A passage is read, set aside, then returned to from a different angle. Students respond without pressure, their understanding developing through gradual engagement. Advancement is noted quietly, without ceremony, allowing learning to remain integrated with daily life. Ports farther inland receive goods redistributed from the coast, schedules adjusted to accommodate river levels and road conditions. The coordination involved is extensive yet unobtrusive, relying on shared expectations refined over time. When delays occur, they are absorbed without complaint, prompting minor adjustments rather than broad disruption. Ceremonial spaces remain available for use without imposing meaning on those who enter. Some pause briefly, others linger, each engaging according to personal inclination. The absence of prescription allows these spaces to retain relevance across changing customs, supporting reflection without directing it. As evening activity resumes its softer cadence, windows frame scenes of domestic routine, shared meals, quiet conversation, preparation for rest. These glimpses blend into a collective impression of steadiness, reinforcing the sense that individual lives contribute to a larger continuity without needing acknowledgement. Beyond immediate perception, documents continue to accumulate, skills refined through practice, and relationships adjust subtly to circumstance. These processes do not converge toward conclusion. They remain distributed, sustaining a pattern that extends forward without assertion, unfolding with the same measured consistency that has come to define the life of the city, remaining open, receptive, and ongoing. Along the colonnades that trace the edges of public squares, caretakers replace worn paving stones one at a time, selecting pieces that fit without forcing alignment. The work pauses whenever passers-by need space, then resumes without comment. Over time, the surface becomes more even, though no single moment marks the change. Feet adjust automatically, trusting the ground without noticing its renewal. In rooms set aside for weighing measures and verifying standards, inspectors compare tools against references kept carefully wrapped. Their manner is deliberate, almost meditative, ensuring that trade remains predictable without invoking authority. When discrepancies appear, they are noted calmly and addressed through guidance rather than sanction, reinforcing a shared interest in consistency that does not depend on surveillance. Gardens within the city respond to attention with steady growth. Vines are guided along walls, herbs trimmed back to encourage resilience. Gardeners exchange cuttings, not tracking origin closely, allowing varieties to intermingle. These small acts of sharing shape, flavors, and scents that become familiar over time, woven into meals and memory alike. In council chambers used less frequently, dust is cleared and seating adjusted before meetings that occur only when needed. Attendance reflects availability rather than obligation. Those present speak with an awareness that absence does not imply disengagement, and decisions are framed to remain workable even if circumstances shift. The resulting flexibility preserves continuity without requiring constant presence. As night air cools, watchkeepers change shifts quietly, noting conditions in ledgers that will be read later if necessary. Their patrols are unremarkable, following routes chosen long ago for reasons no longer debated. The city rests into this vigilance without tension, confident in processes that function without display. Elsewhere, tasks begun earlier continue at reduced pace. A scroll completed, a tool set aside, a calculation finished and left for review. These endings are provisional, openings for the next day rather than closures. Activity tapers but does not cease, sustaining a flow that neither demands attention nor seeks completion, extending forward with the same measured presence that has always allowed the city to remain itself. In narrow side streets, water carriers adjust their routes slightly to account for minor repairs or temporary obstructions, learning these changes through observation rather than instruction. Their containers balance evenly, straps worn smooth where they rest on shoulders, and the cadence of their steps adapts to the texture beneath them. Deliveries arrive without announcement, received as expected elements of the day. Within shaded offices near the basilicas, mediators review notes from earlier discussions, arranging them in ways that highlight relationships rather than sequence. They prepare questions meant to clarify rather than challenge, anticipating conversations that will unfold at a pace set by those involved. When meetings occur, they begin without formality, participants settling into place before speaking, allowing the exchange to find its own shape. Along the riverbanks, reeds shift gently with passing currents, their movement noted only by those who pause long enough to see it. Small maintenance crews reinforce moorings, choosing materials that weather gradually instead of abruptly. These choices reflect a preference for predictability, ensuring that adjustments can be made incrementally rather than in response to failure. In homes set back from main roads, older residents pass time recounting details of routine events to younger listeners, not as lessons but as shared recollections. These stories emphasize continuity over novelty, reinforcing a sense that life proceeds through accumulation rather than turning points. The listeners absorb this perspective without conscious effort, integrating it into their own expectations. Public notices are posted sparingly, written in language that assumes familiarity rather than urgency. Readers stop briefly, take in what is relevant, and continue on, trusting that essential information will remain accessible. The notices fade with exposure, replaced when necessary, their presence understated. As tasks wind down again, spaces are left orderly without being rigid. Tools rest where they will be found easily, doors secured but not emphasized. The city's patterns hold steady, accommodating variation without disruption, continuing through layers of ordinary activity that extend forward quietly, neither seeking attention nor requiring closure. Near the edges of larger courtyards, apprentices sweep fine dust into shallow trays, separating usable fragments from grit without comment. The motion is practiced, neither quick nor slow, guided by familiarity with texture rather than instruction. When the trays fill, they are set aside for later use, contributing quietly to future repairs that will blend seamlessly with older work. In modest offices attached to granaries, stewards review inventories that change by small increments. Adjustments are recorded with care, noting conditions that influence storage rather than attributing cause to individuals. The language used remains descriptive, allowing anyone who reads it later to understand circumstances without drawing conclusions. This approach reduces friction, keeping attention on continuity of supply. Along sheltered paths, teachers walk with students, pausing occasionally to indicate features of the city that illustrate abstract points. A drainage channel becomes an example of proportion. A sequence of arches suggests balance. These references are offered lightly, allowing understanding to emerge without insistence, and the walk continues without needing affirmation. In quieter temples, caretakers replace offerings that have weathered, choosing items that match the setting without drawing notice. The spaces retain a sense of familiarity, shaped by repetition rather than display. Visitors enter and leave without altering the atmosphere, their presence absorbed into the ongoing rhythm. At the margins of administrative life, messengers sought correspondence according to destination, not urgency. Routes are planned with attention to reliability, favoring paths known to remain passable across changing conditions. Messages depart in an order that reflects this priority, ensuring arrival without haste. As activity settles again into a gentler pace, sounds thin into a steady background that does not demand interpretation. The city continues through these understated motions, guided by habits refined over time, remaining open to adjustment while sustaining its prevailing character, carrying forward without emphasis, allowing history to unfold through ordinary persistence. Under covered porticos, cloth merchants examined bolts of fabric laid out to catch indirect light, judging weave and weight by touch as much as by sight. Transactions proceed without raised voices, agreements confirmed through small gestures rather than formal seals. The exchange leaves both sides satisfied, not because of advantage gained, but because expectations align closely enough to remove uncertainty. In the rear rooms of administrative buildings, caretakers tend to heating braziers, adjusting fuel to maintain steady warmth rather than brightness. Ash is cleared regularly and stored for later use, nothing discarded until it has served fully. The rooms retain a consistent temperature that supports concentration without drawing attention to itself, allowing work to continue at an even pace. Along streets less traveled, vines trained over low walls provide shade that shifts gradually as the sun moves. Residents adjust seating positions without comment, following the pattern of light and shadow. These movements become part of the day's texture, unnoticed yet essential, contributing to a shared sense of ease. Correspondence from outlying areas arrives folded simply, marked with symbols indicating content rather than priority. Readers recognize these signs immediately, setting aside messages that require consultation while absorbing others at once. Responses are drafted with similar care, acknowledging context before addressing specifics, maintaining a tone that encourages continuity rather than closure. In artisan quarters, tools are passed from hand to hand for inspection, their balance tested, edges examined. Feedback is offered in brief remarks that suggest possibilities instead of corrections. Adjustments follow naturally, reflecting respect for individual method while sustaining shared standards. As light softens again, communal spaces host gatherings that form and dissolve without planning. Some remain to talk, others depart quietly, no record kept of attendance. The absence of accounting allows participation to remain fluid, reinforcing a sense that involvement is a matter of presence rather than obligation. Beyond these visible moments, the city's framework holds, absorbing minor variations without strain. Processes continue in parallel, intersecting occasionally before diverging again. each contributing to a broader pattern that does not seek completion. The movement persists, gentle and unassertive, carrying forward through ordinary acts that require neither announcement nor conclusion, remaining available to awareness yet independent of it. Near modest shrines set back from main thoroughfares, caretakers refresh oil in small lamps, trimming wicks so flames remain steady rather than bright. The scent of warmed resin lingers briefly, then blends with surrounding air. Passers-by register the change only as a subtle reassurance that familiar practices are being tended without need for remark. In counting rooms attached to trading houses, ledgers are opened to pages already worn smooth at the corners. Entries are added with careful spacing, leaving room for later notes that may never be needed. The figures align closely enough to avoid discussion, and when a discrepancy appears, it is examined from several angles before being adjusted quietly, preserving confidence in the record itself. Along elevated walkways, gardeners adjust planters that soften stone with leaves and blossoms chosen for resilience. Watering follows patterns refined through observation of shade and exposure, and excess is directed toward channels that feed nearby beds. These small calibrations maintain growth without forcing it, allowing plants to settle into the structures that support them. In rooms reserved for drafting agreements, scribes review language aloud to themselves, listening for balance rather than emphasis. Phrases are altered slightly to accommodate varied interpretations, ensuring durability across differing circumstances. Once finished, documents rest for a time before being shared, their presence acknowledged without urgency. At the periphery of the city, way stations receive animals accustomed to regular travel. Hooves are checked, harnesses adjusted, feed measured generously enough to sustain steady movement. Care is taken without ceremony, reflecting an understanding that reliability depends on attention given before fatigue appears. As activity eases into quieter patterns once more, conversations shorten naturally. Gestures replace words, and shared spaces retain a gentle sense of occupancy. The city continues through these understated transitions, its structures and customs supporting one another without strain, remaining open to slight alteration while preserving continuity, extending forward through layers of ordinary care that neither announce themselves nor draw toward any final shape. Within enclosed courtyards where sound carries softly, caretakers adjust rain-catching basins, angling their lips to guide runoff into narrow channels that feed storage systems below. The work is done by eye, guided by familiarity with past seasons rather than prediction. When finished, the basins appear unchanged, their usefulness revealed only when water moves through them as expected. In modest dining rooms attached to civic buildings, shared meals follow no fixed arrangement. Portions are distributed according to presence, conversation drifting toward observations about materials, routes, or minor improvements noticed along the way. These exchanges rarely linger on any one point, yet they influence later choices in ways that feel natural, reinforcing coordination without planning. Across quieter quarters, tailors measure fabric against bodies they know well, adjusting seams to accommodate gradual change rather than sharp alteration. Clothing evolves in fit and cut without marking a moment of transition, allowing wearers to feel continuity even as garments renew. The result is comfort rooted in familiarity, sustained through small attentions. As these activities continue, The surrounding air holds traces of many small labors, indistinct yet cohesive. Light shifts across surfaces already shaped by long use, revealing textures that do not demand notice. The city remains engaged in its own maintenance, carrying forward through interwoven practices that persist without urgency, extending beyond immediate awareness while remaining quietly present. In narrow storerooms beneath residential blocks, jars are rotated so that older contents remain accessible, their placement adjusted according to weight and frequency of use. The practice is unspoken, learned through observation, ensuring that nothing is forgotten at the back, while newer provisions settle into place. The air there is cool and even, preserving what rests within without requiring constant attention. At small desks near open windows, accountants review figures while listening to distant street sounds, their calculations paced by ambient noise rather than clocks. When a column needs reconsideration, they pause, tracing lines lightly before continuing. The work progresses steadily, guided by a preference for alignment over speed, producing records that remain legible long after they are closed. Along the perimeter walls, vines are trimmed just enough to prevent strain on stone, their growth encouraged without letting it dominate. Gardeners step back often to assess balance, responding to what they see rather than adhering to fixed designs. Over time, these living edges soften boundaries without obscuring them, blending cultivation with structure. In meeting spaces reserved for advisory roles, seating is rearranged before use to suit the number present. Discussions begin with shared observations, allowing perspectives to surface gradually. Notes taken during these exchanges emphasize context, preserving nuance for those who will read them later, extending the conversation beyond the room without forcing direction. As these patterns repeat in varied forms, the city's texture deepens. Movements overlap without collision, intentions align without declaration, and the built environment responds through subtle accommodation. Continuity persists not as an outcome but as an ongoing condition, sustained through attention distributed across many hands, carrying forward in a manner that remains open, unassertive, and quietly enduring. Along interior corridors that connect offices seldom used at the same hour, lamps are repositioned to reduce shadow rather than to increase light. The adjustment is minor, achieved by turning a hook or lowering a chain, yet it changes how papers are read and faces recognized. Those who pass through later notice only that the space feels accommodating, as if arranged in anticipation of their presence. In kitchens attached to communal residences, cooks prepare simple dishes whose proportions vary slightly depending on what arrives that day. Ingredients are rinsed, cut, combined, tasted and altered by small additions rather than strict measures. Meals emerge consistent without being identical, sustaining familiarity while allowing for variation that keeps attention gentle and unstrained. At work tables where maps are kept, caretakers smooth creases with palms warmed by use, anchoring corners so surfaces lie flat. Annotations are added sparingly, noting changes in paths or landmarks that have shifted through gradual use. These marks are intended to guide rather than direct, offering orientation without insisting on a single route. In sheltered courtyards, birds gather where grain has been scattered incidentally, their movements adding a layer of motion that requires no response. People pause sometimes to watch, not for diversion but because stillness invites it. The presence of these small gatherings blends into the background, reinforcing a sense that life continues in parallel without interference. Administrative exchanges conducted in passing often resolve matters more efficiently than scheduled meetings. A question raised while walking becomes an answer offered later the same day, carried without urgency. These interactions accumulate quietly, shaping outcomes that feel inevitable once they appear, though no one points to a moment when they were decided. As these varied actions proceed, the city remains composed of overlapping attentions, each sufficient to its task without asserting dominance. Materials age predictably, customs adapt without ceremony, and the shared environment responds through accommodation rather than resistance. The ongoing pattern does not settle into completion. It remains available, receptive, and sustained through ordinary care, continuing onward in its own measured presence. Beneath vaulted ceilings where echoes soften quickly, custodians polish handrails that guide movement along stairs worn smooth by countless steps. The cloths they use are folded and refolded to present clean surfaces, and the motion follows a pattern learned through repetition rather than instruction. When finished, the rails feel familiar, neither new nor neglected, supporting passage without calling attention to themselves. In rooms where civic seals are kept, caretakers examine wax and metal alike, ensuring impressions remain clear enough for recognition. Seals are returned to their places with care, stored according to size and frequency of use. The arrangement changes subtly over time, as certain marks fall into disuse and others become more common, reflecting shifts in practice without formal acknowledgement. Along arcades that shelter pedestrians from sun and rain, small vendors adjust displays to accommodate the angle of passing light. Items are moved closer or farther from the walkway, creating a balance between accessibility and order. Customers pause, consider, and continue, the exchange unfolding without pressure, guided by shared expectations shaped through long familiarity. In study rooms open to the air, readers position themselves near windows or walls depending on preference, selecting places that support attention without isolating. Scrolls and codices are weighted lightly to prevent movement, annotations added in margins where clarity benefits from it. The act of reading becomes part of the room's quiet activity, blending with distant sounds rather than standing apart. At intersections where foot traffic converges, stone markers remain legible through regular care. Their inscriptions are traced occasionally by those waiting nearby, not out of curiosity but habit. These markers guide movement without directing it, allowing individuals to choose paths with confidence grounded in recognition rather than instruction. As these varied moments unfold, the city continues to hold space for them without alteration to its underlying rhythm. Practices align through use, environments adjust through attention, and the collective life proceeds through overlapping gestures that neither accumulate toward a climax nor dissipate into absence. The movement remains steady, open to variation, sustained through the ongoing presence of ordinary acts that extend forward quietly, without demanding conclusion. At the edges of workshops where metal cools slowly, molds are set aside to rest until their temperature matches the surrounding air. Craftspeople resist the impulse to hurry this stage, knowing that patience here preserves integrity later. The waiting becomes part of the process. hands turning to other tasks, while material settles into its intended form. In open galleries attached to administrative quarters, messengers pause briefly to exchange routes and observations, adjusting their paths based on minor obstructions noticed earlier. These exchanges are informal, woven into movement rather than set apart from it. The result is a network that adapts continuously, guided by shared awareness rather than directive. Across low rooftops, tiles are inspected after weather passes. Any loosened pieces reset carefully to maintain alignment. The work blends into the architecture itself, preserving lines that remain familiar even as components renew. From below, nothing appears altered, yet the structure responds quietly to attention given. In courtyards where legal advocates prepare remarks, speech is practiced aloud at conversational volume, refined through listening rather than emphasis. Arguments are shaped to clarify relationships between matters rather than to assert position. When presented later, they carry a tone that invites consideration instead of reaction. At communal wells, users wait their turn without counting positions, observing rhythm rather than order. Vessels are filled steadily, lifted, and replaced with minimal sound. The repetition reinforces trust in the sequence, allowing attention to drift while tasks complete themselves. As these undertakings continue in parallel, the city accommodates them through spaces that remain receptive without instruction. Habits persist through use, decisions emerge through proximity, and the environment holds these movements gently. The unfolding does not gather toward a point. It remains dispersed, sustained through countless adjustments that extend onward without demand, leaving room for continuation beyond any single awareness. Within shaded alcoves carved into older walls, scribes test new ink mixtures on scraps of parchment, adjusting proportions until the flow matches the pressure of their hands. The samples are left to dry where light reaches them indirectly, allowing color to settle without glare. Once satisfied, the mixture is set aside for general use, indistinguishable from earlier batches except in its quiet reliability. Near storehouses that receive goods from surrounding regions, receivers inspect seals and wrappings with practiced ease, noting conditions rather than origins. Crates are stacked to allow air to move freely between them, preventing strain on contents that will be distributed gradually. This arrangement changes subtly as space fills and empties, guided by observation rather than plan. In places where artisans gather briefly before dispersing to their work, exchanges remain practical and unadorned. A suggestion is offered, a tool examined, a method described with gestures more than words. These moments pass quickly, yet they influence later work in ways that feel natural, carried forward without conscious recall. Along terraces overlooking quieter lanes, residents tend small containers of soil, rotating them to balance exposure. Leaves are wiped clean of dust, stems adjusted to grow upright without constraint. The care is light, consistent, and sufficient, sustaining growth without pressing it into display. Administrative notes written for internal reference are kept deliberately concise, leaving space for interpretation rather than exhausting detail. Those who consult them later bring their own context, completing meaning through experience. This approach reduces the need for revision, allowing guidance to remain useful across varying situations. As the city continues through these measured actions, Its life unfolds through attentions that neither compete nor converge. Structures adapt through maintenance, customs shift through use, and governance persists through shared understanding rather than command. The pattern remains open, sustained by countless small decisions that do not seek to resolve themselves, extending onward with the same quiet steadiness that allows everything to remain in motion without urgency. At the edge of a wide courtyard paved with uneven stone, caretakers sweep debris into narrow channels that guide dust away when rain comes. The motion is habitual, adjusted to the texture beneath their feet, neither rushed nor delayed. When the work is finished, the courtyard looks unchanged, though its surface responds more evenly to footsteps. Inside long rooms where records are stored on low shelves, attendants shift bundles slightly to prevent the weight from settling unevenly. Twine is loosened, retied, or replaced, depending on how it has aged. The process leaves faint impressions on the fingers, marks that fade before anyone notices them. A bell suspended from a beam near the central passageway is tested with a soft touch, not to signal anything, but to ensure it still answers when needed. Its tone settles quickly, absorbed by surrounding walls, and the bell is left to rest again. People passing nearby register the sound only as part of the space, no more remarkable than footsteps or breath. In dwellings arranged around shared wells, water is drawn in measured amounts, poured into vessels sized by long familiarity. Spillage is minimal, not through caution but through repetition. The well's stone rim shows gradual smoothing, shaped by contact rather than intention. Those responsible for resolving minor disputes often listen without interruption, allowing pauses to remain unfilled. Decisions are offered briefly, framed as adjustments rather than judgments. The participants accept them without ceremony, returning to their tasks with little need for discussion. Beyond the built areas, paths continue to be traced by regular use, not straightened or reinforced unless wear demands it. Grass bends, soil compresses, and the route becomes clearer over time without being formalized. Movement follows these lines naturally, sustaining a connection between places that does not require reinforcement. Throughout these ongoing motions, the environment responds in small ways. Echoes soften, surfaces adapt, habits settle into place. Nothing presses forward or recedes entirely. Life proceeds through attention applied lightly and repeatedly, allowing continuity to extend without defining its boundaries. Along the inner lanes, shutters are adjusted to admit a measured amount of light, angled according to where shadows tend to linger. The hinges respond with familiar resistance, and the wood holds its position without further attention. Rooms behind them remain cool, their air shaped by these small calibrations. At a modest administrative table set near an open arch, notes are copied by hand onto fresh sheets, not to replace what exists, but to keep parallel versions aligned. The writing varies slightly from one copy to the next, reflecting the pace of the hand rather than any change in meaning. When finished, the pages are placed in different locations, ensuring access without centralizing authority. Food preparation follows patterns that rarely require instruction. Ingredients are combined in proportions learned through observation, adjusted subtly depending on texture or scent. The resulting meals resemble those of previous days closely enough that no one remarks on them, though each carries a quiet distinction detectable only while eating. Public structures receive attention in increments. A stone step is rotated to distribute wear, a beam supported while a joint is tightened, a surface washed with plain water to remove residue that gathers unnoticed. These actions do not announce themselves, yet they influence how spaces are used, encouraging certain paths and discouraging others. Beyond the settled areas, the land maintains its own rhythms. Wind passes through low growth, leaving patterns that shift without erasing what was there before. Those who move through it adjust their pace instinctively, guided by conditions that require no explanation, allowing the larger setting to continue shaping daily life without interruption. In the narrow courtyard where water is collected, vessels are repositioned to catch runoff more evenly. Their rims show slight variations from years of use, and these irregularities guide how they are set, favoring balance over symmetry. Someone rinses their hands and leaves without drying them, letting the air complete the task. A small council meets without ceremony, seated according to convenience rather than rank. Topics move slowly from maintenance schedules to the reassignment of a shared workspace, each matter handled until it no longer requires attention. Decisions are recorded only when necessary, and even then the language remains spare, allowing room for adjustment later. Clothing changes in modest ways. Seams are reinforced where strain is expected, colors muted by repeated washing until they settle into tones that blend with walls and paths. New garments appear infrequently, and when they do, they resemble what is already familiar, easing their acceptance into daily circulation. The soundscape shifts gently as doors open and close. Footsteps soften on worn surfaces, and distant activity filters through layers of stone and wood. These sounds do not compete. They overlap and recede, creating a steady background that people move within rather than react to. In workshops set back from the main routes, tools are returned to their places with care that suggests long acquaintance. Each mark on a handle or edge serves as a reference point, guiding grip and motion without conscious thought. Work proceeds at a pace determined by materials rather than expectation. Along the outer boundary, plantings are trimmed just enough to prevent encroachment. Growth is not discouraged, only shaped, allowing paths to remain legible while preserving the sense of continuity beyond them. The boundary itself remains understated, functioning more as a suggestion than a barrier. As evening approaches without announcement, interior lights are adjusted incrementally. No single change defines the shift, yet spaces grow quieter, movements fewer. What remains active does so gently, sustaining the ongoing pattern without drawing focus, and the larger flow continues without pause. Bread is portioned with an eye for what will be needed later, slices set aside beneath a cloth that breathes just enough. Crumbs are brushed into a small bowl rather than discarded, to be mixed into something else when the opportunity presents itself. No one remarks on the practice. It persists because it works. A messenger pauses at a threshold, not to announce arrival, but to adjust the strap of a satchel that has softened over time. Inside are notes written in a steady hand, concerned with boundary markers and shared access to wells. The recipient reads them once, then again more slowly, before placing them with others that have already shaped the week. Windows are left partially open where the air moves best. Their frames bear shallow grooves where shutters have rested for generations, and the wood holds warmth without releasing it too quickly. From these openings, a view of roofs and lanes appears unchanged, though attention reveals small alterations in angle and repair. Instruction happens quietly, often without formal setting. A younger pair of hands mirrors an older one, learning pressure and timing through proximity rather than explanation. When a mistake occurs, it is corrected by adjustment, not comment, and the work resumes as though uninterrupted. Patterns of movement within the streets favor familiarity. Shortcuts exist but are seldom used, as the longer routes allow encounters that reinforce shared awareness. Greetings are brief, sometimes only a nod, sufficient to maintain connection without obligation. Near the archive, dust is lifted and settled again as pages are turned. Records accumulate at a pace that does not overwhelm their storage, each edition weighed against relevance. The room remains cool, its walls thick enough to temper sound, and within it, the ongoing account continues to accept what is placed before it. A low bench beside the courtyard wall receives its usual use, bearing the weight of those who pause there to tie laces or rest parcels. The stone beneath has been smoothed by decades of contact, its edges rounded not by design but by patience. Nearby, a basin collects runoff from a narrow spout, and the water's surface settles quickly after each disturbance. Decisions about maintenance are made in passing, agreed upon with minimal exchange. A loosened tile is noted, a joint resealed when materials are at hand, the work folded into other obligations. No record marks these acts, yet their accumulation shapes the stability of the place more reliably than any directive. Inside a long room set apart from the main thoroughfare, fabric is laid out and measured without haste. Colors are chosen for endurance rather than display, dyes mixed to hold their tone through repeated washing. Finished pieces are stacked in a manner that allows air to move between them, acknowledging future use without anticipation. The outer fields show subtle shifts in boundary lines where growth has favored one side over another. These adjustments are accepted with little discussion, as soil and weather are treated as participants rather than variables. Paths curve accordingly, following the easier passage rather than insisting on earlier intent. As evening approaches without announcement, lamps are prepared but not yet lit. Their glass is wiped clear, wicks trimmed to an even length, oil checked by feel instead of measurement. The light, when it arrives, will find its place among familiar surfaces, continuing the quiet accommodation between habit and setting. Along the narrower passage where voices tend to soften on their own, a small register rests on a shelf at shoulder height. It is updated with a simple mark when goods move in or out, the surface of the page bearing faint impressions from earlier entries. The book remains open, not as an invitation but as a reminder that attention is ongoing. Meals are prepared in shared spaces with an economy of motion that leaves room for conversation without requiring it. Ingredients are handled in an order learned early, knives returned to the same place between uses, heat adjusted by sound rather than sight. The resulting dishes are portioned evenly, allowing those present to choose their pace without comment. Windows set deep into the walls moderate the air, catching light at angles that change gradually across the floor. Dust gathers in predictable patterns, brushed aside when it begins to dull the stone's natural tone. The architecture offers no instruction, yet its proportions guide movement with quiet insistence. Beyond the clustered buildings, the land holds traces of earlier arrangements in the spacing of trees and the alignment of fences. These remnants coexist with newer plantings, neither removed nor emphasized. The continuity they suggest is neither celebrated nor denied, simply carried forward through the ordinary acts that give the place its shape. A bell with a muted edge is sounded at intervals determined less by schedule than by accumulation. Its tone settles into the surrounding rooms and fades without prompting a rush, serving instead as a gentle alignment of attention. Those nearby acknowledge it by adjusting posture or finishing a thought, then continue with what is at hand. Records circulate through a modest council where decisions are made by amendment rather than decree. Margins carry notes in different hands, each edition considered alongside the rest. Nothing is sealed away. Completed pages return to the same cabinet, where they can be consulted without ceremony by anyone who needs them. Clothing is mended often enough that stitches become familiar signatures. Fabric grows softer with use, taking on the contour of daily movement. When garments finally thin beyond repair, their pieces find other purposes, reinforcing handles or lining boxes, extending their presence without drawing attention to the change. At the edges of paths, grasses bend according to patterns shaped by frequent passage. Stones shift slightly underfoot and are set back in place when noticed. The surroundings respond in small ways to repeated care, holding steady while accommodating these quiet adjustments. Light reaches the inner rooms indirectly, filtered by narrow openings that were measured long ago and never reconsidered. It drifts across surfaces without insisting on itself, settling on shelves, along ledges, across the grain of wood worn smooth by touch. People working there adjust their tasks to the illumination rather than altering the space, turning pages or tools slightly until everything remains legible. Meals are prepared with little discussion. Ingredients are chosen from what has been kept aside, not by preference but by sequence. A pot is placed back in its usual position once emptied, still warm, its lid resting at a familiar angle. Conversations, when they arise, tend toward the practical, often ending before a clear conclusion is reached. The outer walls show faint variations where repairs were made by different hands across many seasons. No attempt was made to disguise the joins. They remain visible, not as markers of age but as confirmations of ongoing care. Vines have learned these irregularities and follow them upward, guided by texture rather than intention. Children pass through the shared spaces with an ease that comes from knowing where not to linger. They learn the rhythm of movement by observation, slowing near doorways, stepping aside where passage narrows. Their presence adds no disruption, only a subtle recalibration of how others move. In storage rooms, objects are arranged less by category than by weight and reach. Heavier items remain low, lighter ones closer to hand. When something is borrowed, its absence is noted only when the space it occupied becomes useful again, prompting its return without request. Beyond the buildings, the air carries the mixed scent of earth and treated wood. Sounds travel unevenly, softened by distance and the shapes that interrupt them. What reaches the ear arrives without urgency, allowing each moment to remain sufficient as it is. A clerk settles onto a low bench near the threshold, unrolling a narrow strip of vellum that curls back on itself. Marks are added sparingly, not to record decisions but to acknowledge that matters were seen. When the strip is complete, it is weighted with a stone and left where others can glance at it in passing, absorbing what is relevant without stopping. Water moves through the settlement in shallow channels, guided by stone lips that redirect overflow without sound. People rinse their hands where it suits them, stepping aside when someone else approaches, neither greeting nor avoiding one another. The channels are cleared regularly, not on a schedule, but whenever leaves begin to gather. Clothing reflects the pace of the place. Repairs are made with thread that does not match, chosen for strength rather than appearance. A sleeve shortened once is rarely returned to its former length. As fabrics soften, they conform to familiar movements, holding shapes that are no longer deliberate. Along the perimeter, small structures lean slightly, responding to the ground beneath them rather than resisting it. Doors open inward to preserve space outside, hinges oiled when they begin to speak. Nothing is sealed completely. Air is allowed its quiet passage, carrying with it the steady continuity of ordinary days. A long table near an open wall holds objects that change slowly. A shallow bowl with coins arranged by wear. A bundle of reeds trimmed to equal length. A ledger closed with a ribbon whose color has faded unevenly. People pause there briefly, adjusting placements when something seems out of balance, then move on without comment. Voices are low enough that they blend with the ambient sounds of work. Instructions pass by proximity rather than announcement, conveyed through small gestures or the placement of tools. Apprentices learn by watching where hands hesitate and where they do not, absorbing patterns without formal guidance. Stone surfaces carry faint traces of past use, edges smoothed where palms rest while waiting. In shaded corners, dust settles in layers thin enough to be disturbed by a passing sleeve. No effort is made to erase these signs. They are incorporated into the look of things, read as part of the environment. At the far end of the settlement, plantings follow the shape of the land rather than straight lines. Growth is encouraged where soil holds moisture, discouraged where it does not, resulting in a patchwork that shifts subtly with care. Those tending the ground exchange tools as needed, returning each one to a familiar place when finished. Near a sheltered alcove, a kiln cools gradually, its warmth lingering in the stone long after the work is done. Someone checks the surface with the back of a hand, gauging readiness by feel rather than measure, then leaves a note etched lightly into clay set aside for reuse. Finished pieces are placed where light can reach them, not for display but to ensure even drying. Meals follow a loose sequence shaped by availability. Bowls are filled from shared vessels and return without comment, their rims nicked in places that make them easy to recognize. Leftovers are folded into later preparations, changed enough to be familiar without being identical, sustaining continuity through small variations. Paths between dwellings remain unmarked, yet everyone knows where they lead. Footfalls create a language of pressure and release, guiding newcomers without instruction. When rain alters the ground, adjustments are made with stones carried in one at a time, set where the surface asks for them. In rooms used for study, windows are kept narrow, directing attention inward. Shelves hold materials arranged by weight rather than subject, heavier volumes anchoring lighter ones. Pages are turned slowly, not to finish but to stay aligned with the rhythm of reading, allowing thought to settle before moving on. Along the portico, a clerk pauses to adjust a tablet resting against a column, shifting it slightly so the shadow no longer cuts across the margin. Entries are brief, shaped to be legible in passing. and they remain where they are once set down. Others add marks beside them later, not corrections but acknowledgements, creating a quiet accumulation that holds without being finalized. Water carriers move at an unhurried pace, balancing loads with a practiced ease that leaves space for conversation to drift in and out. They stop where steps descend toward a basin lined with smooth stone, rinsing hands before continuing. The sound there is steady and contained, neither loud nor absent, filling the space without demanding attention. Across a courtyard, fabric hangs loosely from wooden frames, catching air rather than resisting it. The colors soften as they dry, becoming closer to the tones of dust and leaf. Someone passes through and adjusts a corner that has folded inward, restoring its line with a single motion, then goes on without looking back. In a modest hall used for deliberation, benches are arranged so no one faces directly forward. The arrangement encourages listening that moves sideways, allowing remarks to settle among those present instead of standing apart. When the room empties, the benches remain as they are, ready to receive the next gathering without alteration. At the edge of the market, scales rest on a low table where weights are kept in a shallow tray. The metal bears faint discolorations from frequent handling, and the tray is dusted clean each morning without ceremony. Exchanges occur with a glance and a nod, measures adjusted by touch until balance feels right, after which the scales are left exactly as they were found. A gardener moves through a narrow strip of earth between walls, trimming growth that leans too far into the walkway. The cuttings are gathered loosely and set aside to dry, later mixed into soil elsewhere. Nothing is removed entirely, it is only redirected, guided into places where space allows it to settle. In the offices where correspondence arrives, messages are read aloud softly before being placed in pigeonholes arranged by destination rather than origin. The sound of voices there remains even, flattening urgency into something easier to carry. Replies are written when the room feels ready for them, sometimes immediately, sometimes after the light has shifted. Stoneworkers pause often, not from fatigue, but to observe the alignment of what they are building with what already stands. Each block is seated with care, its surface checked against the line of the wall by sight alone. When the fit satisfies, tools are set down in a familiar order, awaiting the next moment of use without anticipation. Beyond the settled areas, fields extend in gentle patterns shaped by long-standing agreements. Boundaries are marked by trees whose placement predates memory, their roots holding soil and understanding in equal measure. Work there proceeds according to weather and inclination, tasks taken up when conditions invite them and set aside when they do not. As evening approaches without announcement, lamps are lit gradually, one after another, until streets hold a soft continuity of light. Shadows lengthen and overlap, merging into forms that feel stable rather than obscuring. Movement slows not by command but by shared inclination, and the city continues in this manner, attentive yet unhurried, allowing its course to remain broad and accommodating. Near a bend in the street where the paving stones change texture, a pair of sandals has been set aside to dry, their straps laid flat so they will hold their shape. Someone passing notices a loose tie and adjusts it, not knowing whose it is, then continues on without slowing. The stones there retain warmth longer than most, releasing it gently as the air cools. Inside a modest archive, scrolls are shifted slightly to make room for new arrivals. The order is not rigid, guided instead by a sense of proximity between ideas, allowing related texts to rest near one another without formal classification. Dust is brushed away with a cloth kept folded in a niche, returned to its place when the task is done. At a crossing where carts often pause, a shallow groove has formed over years of passage. Rather than filling it, people step into it deliberately, finding the path easier that way. The groove becomes a guide, not a flaw, shaping movement through quiet consent. A small council gathers informally beside an open doorway, their discussion carried in low tones that blend with surrounding sounds. Decisions emerge gradually, shaped by what seems workable rather than ideal. When agreement settles, it does so without record, held instead in the shared memory of those present. Further along the riverbank, boats are secured with ropes tied in familiar patterns. The knots are checked by feel, not sight, and adjusted until they sit comfortably against the wood. Water moves past without comment, reflecting fragments of the built world and carrying them onward. In homes where evening tasks continue, oil is poured carefully into lamps, wicks trimmed to a length learned over time. The flame steadies, casting light that does not reach far but reaches enough. Conversation tapers and resumes in intervals, matching the pace of hands at work. Above it all, the sky remains expansive, its presence constant and unremarked. What unfolds below does so within that steady openness, neither hurried nor fixed, continuing in ways that do not require attention to persist. At a threshold where interior meets street, a shallow bowl is left to catch rain carried in by wind. When it gathers enough, the water is poured into a larger vessel kept for washing stone dust from hands. The bowl returns to its place, its surface dulled by use, content to remain unnoticed until needed again. In a long room where maps are kept, lines are redrawn lightly as paths shift through use. The marks do not erase what was there before. They sit alongside older traces, showing where movement has preferred one route over another. Those who consult the maps take them as suggestions rather than instructions, folding the knowledge into their own sense of direction. Near a corner shrine that receives little attention, someone replaces a chipped tile with one cut to fit without exact match. The difference is visible but unimportant, and the wall accepts it easily. Offerings placed there are simple and brief, more an acknowledgement of presence than a request for favor. A baker works before most others are awake, testing the oven's heat with a scrap of dough that darkens slowly at the edges. Loaves are arranged with space between them, allowing air to circulate as they rise. When the door is opened, warmth spreads into the street, blending with cooler air rather than pushing it aside. In shaded courtyards, older voices carry stories that are not fixed enough to be retold the same way twice. Listeners absorb what applies and let the rest pass through, shaping understanding without needing to keep every detail. The telling ends when it ends, without signal or emphasis. Along a wall repaired many times, vines are trained to grow where stone joints are strongest. Their leaves soften the surface, catching light in uneven patterns. Maintenance there consists mostly of watching, intervening only when growth asks for guidance. As the hours continue to layer themselves gently, activity neither gathers nor disperses completely. It remains distributed across spaces and tasks, held together by habit and mutual regard, moving forward in a manner that does not seek notice and does not require it. In a narrow passage where sound carries differently, a bell is rung once to signal an arrival, its tone absorbed by surrounding stone before it can travel far. The gesture is sufficient, and the bell rests again against its hook. Those inside take note without altering their pace, adjusting only where space is needed. At a table set near an open window, small coins are counted and recounted, not from uncertainty but from habit. The metal warms slightly under the fingers, and the total is recorded on a strip of wax that will be smoothed clean later. Nothing here insists on permanence. Records serve their moment and then release it. A group of children traces patterns in dust gathered along a low wall, copying shapes seen in mosaics nearby. The lines blur as they work, smudged by sleeves and laughter kept at a moderate volume. When the wall is brushed clean again, the memory of the shapes lingers without needing preservation. In workshops where tools are shared, handles are adjusted with bits of cloth to fit different hands. No one claims ownership of the modifications. They remain until someone else changes them. The tools carry these layers of use quietly, accommodating without comment. Beside a public fountain, cups are stacked in uneven columns, chipped but serviceable. Passers-by take one, rinse it, drink, and return it to whichever stack feels right. The system persists through repetition rather than oversight, sustained by a mutual understanding that requires no reinforcement. A messenger pauses to rest beneath an overhang, reading a note once more before delivering it. The message is brief, composed to travel easily. Afterward, the paper will be reused, its fibers carrying traces of ink that do not interfere with what comes next. In spaces set aside for reflection, floors are left bare, allowing footsteps to sound as they are. People enter and leave without ceremony, sitting where they choose, standing when they feel ready. The air remains still enough to notice breath moving through it. Beyond the clustered buildings, the land continues its steady exchange with those who tend it. Furrows are followed with care, seeds placed at intervals learned through observation. Growth unfolds at its own rate, neither hurried nor delayed, contributing quietly to the larger pattern of life that surrounds and sustains the city. All of this proceeds without announcement, woven into days that do not ask to be marked. What endures does so through attention given lightly and withdrawn just as gently, allowing the shared world to remain open, ongoing and unconfined by any single moment. Near a row of columns whose bases show uneven wear, a caretaker sweeps grit into a shallow pan, pausing when the bristles catch on a groove carved unintentionally by years of passing heels. The groove is left untouched, acknowledged as part of the surface now, and the pan is emptied into soil kept for mixing mortar later on. In a room where disputes are occasionally brought, the door remains open even when voices are low. Those seated inside shift slightly to make room as others drift past, the boundary between private and public kept permeable. Agreements reached there rely less on precise wording than on a shared sense of what can be maintained without strain. Along a shaded walkway, small niches hold lamps extinguished earlier, their soot marks faint and layered. Someone runs a finger along the stone, feeling where the surface dips and rises, then replaces the lamp without adjusting its angle. The walkway continues to guide movement simply by being there. At a communal table used for sorting goods, baskets are rearranged to accommodate a different mix of items than usual. The change requires no comment. Hands move instinctively, redistributing weight so the table remains steady. When sorting ends, the baskets stay where they have settled, ready for whatever comes next. A reader pauses beside a window, letting light fall across a page just enough to follow the text. The pause extends, not from distraction, but from a thought that has reached a comfortable depth. When reading resumes, it does so without urgency, picking up wherever the eye lands. In a quiet quarter where repairs are ongoing, scaffolding is adjusted incrementally. Boards shifted a little at a time rather than all at once. Workers step back often to observe the structure from different distances, ensuring it aligns with surrounding forms. Progress is measured by fit rather than speed. Beyond the walls, a path curves gently around a stand of trees whose branches filter sound. Travelers slow there naturally, adjusting their pace to the narrowing ground. The path continues onward, unchanged by the momentary attention it receives. As activities overlap and separate again, the pattern holds without tightening. What is built, tended, and considered remains in circulation, shaped by hands that know when to act and when to let things remain as they are, carrying forward a way of being that neither presses nor resists the passage of time. Near a shallow stair that descends toward a storage room, a jar is set down to cool, its glaze still faintly tacky. Someone rotates it a fraction so the base settles evenly, then leaves it where air can circulate on all sides. The stair keeps its rhythm of use, accommodating the object without interruption. In a courtyard where voices arrive softened by distance, chalk marks appear on stone to outline a plan for rearranging benches. The marks are thin and temporary, drawn with a hand that knows they will fade. When the benches move later, they follow the suggestion loosely, ending where balance feels sufficient. A watchkeeper adjusts a shutter at the top of a tower, narrowing the opening so wind passes through without lifting papers inside. The adjustment is slight, almost invisible from below, yet it steadies the room. From that height, the spread of rooftops reads as a pattern of surfaces rather than a collection of claims. Along a canal edge reads a cutback just enough to keep water moving cleanly. The cut ends are gathered and bound with twine, carried away to line baskets or patch roofs. The canal remains open, reflecting the underside of bridges in fragments that change with each step taken nearby. At a small table near a wall of notices, a hand smooths a curl of parchment flat, pressing it down with a stone that fits the palm. The notice remains unadorned, its message brief and practical. Those who read it do so while passing, absorbing what they need without stopping long. In kitchens where heat lingers, pots are shifted to cooler stones, lids tip to release steam at an angle that keeps condensation from dripping back. Spices are added sparingly, guided by smell more than measure. The result is shared without commentary, accepted as part of the day's flow. On a roof repaired with mixed tiles, rain collects in shallow pools and drains along channels worn into the slope. The channels guide water toward a gutter that empties into a garden cistern. The system holds because it has been watched, adjusted, and left alone when it works. Near the edge of a square, a scribe sharpens a reed, testing the cut on scrap before returning to a page already half filled. The writing continues where it paused, neither hurried nor delayed. When the reed dulls again, it will be tended once more, and the page will wait. Through shaded arcades, the air moves with a consistency that encourages an even pace. footsteps enter and leave the soundscape without competing. What passes through these spaces does so gently, adding to the ongoing arrangement without seeking to define it, and the city continues to hold its shape by allowing each small action to find its place. Along a narrow ledge beneath a window, a line of small stones has been arranged to keep shutters from closing too quickly. Each stone differs slightly, chosen for how it rests rather than how it looks. When one slips, it is replaced with another from the ground below, the exchange made without pause. In a room where plans are discussed only when needed, a tray of wooden markers is kept near the entrance. The markers are moved across a smooth surface to indicate responsibilities that shift gently among those present. When the discussion ends, the markers return to the tray, leaving no sign of where they had been. Near a stretch of wall warmed by afternoon light, someone repairs a net used for carrying produce. The knots are tightened by habit, fingers moving at a pace learned long ago. The net grows whole again, ready to be folded and hung where it can be reached easily next time. At the edge of a small forum, pigeons gather where grain has spilled from a sack set down briefly. No one shoos them away. The birds disperse on their own, leaving the space as they found it, save for a faint scattering of husks that will be swept later. In a passage leading toward the baths, steam drifts outward and thins as it meets cooler air. The scent of oil and stone settles into the walls, becoming part of the passage itself. Those entering do so with an understanding of shared pace, allowing room for others without instruction. A keeper of records adjusts a stack of tablets so the weight is evenly distributed, preventing cracks from forming over time. The adjustment is small but sufficient. The tablets remain accessible, their contents meant to be consulted rather than preserved untouched. Beyond the inner streets, a low fence marks a garden boundary more by suggestion than barrier. Gates are left unlatched, opening inward with a slight pressure. Plants there grow according to care, offered intermittently, responding more to consistency than intensity. As these moments overlap, none demands precedence. Each finds space alongside the others, contributing to a texture of living that remains open to change without being driven by it. The pattern continues, broad and patient, allowing attention to drift without losing its way. Beneath an awning stretched loosely between beams, a cobbler examines a sole that has worn thinner at one edge. The repair is measured against the shape of the foot remembered rather than recorded, leather softened with a touch of oil before stitching begins. When finished, the shoe rests beside others awaiting their turn, none distinguished by priority. In a side room connected to the main thoroughfare, a small box holds tokens used to mark shared tools. The box is opened when needed and closed again without ceremony, its contents changing hands often enough that no pattern forms. The tools circulate, returning eventually to familiar places without anyone tracking their path. A gentle breeze threads through a colonnade, carrying the smell of damp stone and grain. Curtains tied back earlier are loosened slightly to let the air move more freely. The adjustment is made by feel, stopping when the fabric settles into a position that neither billows nor clings. At a desk set close to the floor, a young apprentice copies figures from a tablet onto a fresh surface, pausing to check spacing rather than totals. The copying teaches steadiness more than accuracy, and the tablet is set aside when the light shifts enough to make the work less comfortable. The unfinished copy waits without consequence. Near a corner where two streets meet unevenly, a patch of plaster dries in stages, its color gradually approaching the surrounding wall. Passers-by glance at it briefly, noting the progress without expectation. The wall holds, altered only by time and attention applied in small portions. In a room reserved for storage of seasonal goods, bundles are rotated so those at the back come forward. The motion is practiced and slow, guided by memory of weight and scent. Nothing spoils here, not because it is hurried along, but because it is allowed to rest when rest is needed. Along the outer walk, lanterns are lowered a little, their light redirected to avoid glare on stone. The change softens edges and keeps the path readable without emphasis. Travelers adjust naturally, neither slowing nor speeding, guided by what is offered rather than instructed. As these adjustments continue to occur where they are needed, the larger arrangement remains flexible. Spaces adapt without strain, habits evolve without announcement, and the shared life of the place carries on, steady and unforced, extending beyond the reach of any single moment while remaining close to those who pass through it. A narrow basin near the wells is rinsed and set back into its shallow niche, water traced away with a cloth that has already lost its color. The cloth is folded once and left on a ledge where it will dry unevenly, edges stiffening before the center does. No one checks on it again. Within a shaded courtyard, a pair of elders sit apart from one another, each focused on a different task. One adjusts a register of names by moving a pebble from one column to the next. The other listens to the rhythm of distant steps and nods slightly, as if confirming a familiar pace. Decisions are made in this manner, small and reversible. The scent of cooked lentils drifts through a passage that bends gently before opening again. Bowls are filled without measuring, portions guided by the weight of the hand and the memory of who ate lightly earlier. A child pauses to watch steam rise and fade, then carries a bowl away carefully, leaving no trace behind. On an upper level, shutters are tilted rather than closed, allowing a band of light to fall across a table marked with old scratches. The light shifts slowly across the surface, touching each mark without revealing how it was made. The table remains useful regardless. A low wall bordering the gardens is reinforced with stones gathered from nearby ground. Each stone is turned once before being placed, not for inspection but to feel its balance. The wall gains a slight curve, accommodating the shape of what was available rather than insisting on alignment. In a quiet chamber set aside for records, a scroll is unrolled only halfway. The reader stops before the end, not from fatigue but from habit, trusting that the remaining lines will hold until they are needed. The scroll is weighted and returned to its shelf, edges protected from curling. Beyond the last row of dwellings, grasses bend and rise with little coordination, responding to air that moves without pattern. Footpaths appear and soften again, shaped by repeated use and gradual forgetting. The land remains open to this exchange, receiving it without comment and offering nothing final in return.